Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Oh, hello. It's good to see everyone. I know this is an unusual time. We usually meet at 10 o'clock Pacific time. But today we have a special guest, and she's not awake at 10 o'clock Pacific time. It's the middle of the night for her, and I'd like to bring talent and conversations that are of value to in-house lawyers. And I'm really excited to have someone from Singapore. She's a wealth of information, experiences, and insight. And yes, that means we're going to meet at an unusual time. So very excited to have this conversation. And without further ado, Dharshi, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. I am so excited to have this across the ocean conversation and bring it to my audience and learn from you. And for folks who haven't met you somehow, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Olga. The feeling is mutual. Thank you for accommodating me over this side of the world. It is a Friday morning in Singapore where I'm coming to you from today. My name is Dharshi, and I'm Assistant General Counsel for the APAC region of a global consulting firm, FTI Consulting.
And what do you do at FTI? What is your focus?
So as many, the typical kind of general counsel in-house role in a very lean team means we do a bit of everything. We're looking after all of the internal business needs from client facing to managing the business to employment and deployment of new technologies and AI and governance. We are supported globally, but very lean out here. So yeah.
I love it. It's and many more ands that you're gonna not cover.
So many ands I've been in Singapore about 3.5 years, Olga, but my career has been a very windy one over the best part of the last 20 years. You can probably tell from my accent, I was born and raised in the UK, started out in big law, corporate, through IP, media, but the biggest part of my career was in the TMT and data privacy space, both in London and Sydney, Australia for about 9 years, Dubai, and now Singapore. And over the last 10 years in particular, DEI had a big focus of my life in and outside the office. So my multi-hyphenate professional career has included having an inclusion consultancy, and I'm still a practicing executive coach for startup founders and now more and more so lawyers. So in a way, this discussion and the new world of AI in our profession has felt like actually a big connector of all of those things, the people, the tech, the law, and everything. And so I'm really excited to be part of this new world order.
I think I'm with you on that. As someone who's been everywhere and nowhere and part of everything and nothing in some ways, the new world of opportunities is really exciting.
It is. And it takes one to know one, I think. Olga, I followed your work and everything that you build as well. And I'm so excited for this conversation also, and curious as well to learn how some of these, how the human elements get put into new tools as well.
Yeah, I love that. Let's dive into it. Let's talk about this new world of AI. And we've been hearing about this thing that AI won't replace lawyers, who use AI will. And why do you think that framing is this a right framing? Is it too narrow? Is it too wide? I've heard folks making fun of it. I've heard folks religiously follow it. Curious what you think. Is this the right framing? Is it missing anything?
Yeah, absolutely right. It's something that I'm just hearing over and over again. And I can understand where this phrase is getting at, particularly in our profession, because it is encouraging adaptation in a profession that's not known for it being at the forefront of adopting and adapting to change the fastest. And I'm certainly not advocating for resisting technology altogether as a long-term viable strategy. But the phrase oversimplifies what's really happening, because for me, it frames the future as law as primarily a tooling problem, right? As though the main differentiator between the lawyers of the future will be who can use AI the fastest or the most efficiently. But actually, the more I work with AI and upskill, the more I really believe that the human judgment factor is so important and is missing from that phrase, because AI doesn't create good judgments. For me, AI is a mirror and it reflects back at us the existing judgment that we have. So using AI without strong judgment will just produce confident looking but more dangerous responses faster. And so that for me is where I really lean into the fact that we mustn't lose sight of the importance of the human judgment element. And my other beef with the phrase is that perhaps unintentionally, it really is over glamorizing the technical fluency aspect. And I find myself sometimes reacting a bit when I'm constantly seeing my LinkedIn feed with lawyers who are leading with, look, I'm a lawyer, but I've vibe coded this app. Look, I'm a lawyer, but look how I've used technology. And I blame that phrase for trying to pit people into lanes, and for lawyers feeling the need to have to put themselves into, look at me, I'm using AI, therefore I'm good. When actually, again, we come back to this fact that it's using AI with really excellent judgment, because AI will spit out the answers. But just as you heard from the breadth of my role, and most roles certainly in-house, it's the humans that are deciding how to use that input. It's the humans that are deciding what we're willing to live with, what risks we're willing to take. And all of that nuance can get lost a bit, I feel, in that phrase.
Yeah, there's so many directions we can go from this vibe coding conversation, but I will resist. I will be disciplined. I will focus to accomplish what we set out to do. And let me observe a few things. You and I talked now for a while. You repeatedly speak about labels lawyers build careers around: technical expert, safest pair of hands, fastest responder, those things, that the identities that folks shape as they practice law. And which of those labels are weakening first, and what's replacing them? And I also would love to weave in your own story and perspective on kind of biases we see here.
Yeah, sure. And I'd say that my sort of me leaning into labels, I have a podcast called Unbiased, and this is a topic that I've been interested in, but it was really through coaching lawyers, and particularly over the last year or two, that I was seeing quite a lot of the fear that this new change was bringing about. And it was coming across in the form of, oh, look, AI can now draft this for me. I put this through AI and it summarized and produced something really beautiful for me. That's the end of my job. I feel like my job's gone. And I found myself reacting a little bit to that, because I was thinking, really, is that all we are as lawyers? And so to answer the first part of your question, the up to date, when we talked about some of the labels we were picking out, the fast responder, it's technical precision. To date, we were valued for our access to information and our ability to synthesize that information, to the knowledge, to having the right answers, to being able to draft the beautiful clause. And that's what we're getting valued for. That's what we're paid for. Yes, judgment happens and builds with experience, but it's not where the spotlight has been. And I think the shift, as we've started to touch on, Olga, is in that judgment. It's in the decision-making piece, particularly decision-making in times of ambiguity, uncertainty. There is so much uncertainty around us geopolitically that on top of the AI discussion, leaders really need help. But lawyers have been typically known for having all the answers. Now we need to be able to be the safe pair of hands that can navigate that ambiguity and make decisions calmly in that space. Now, my view is that actually all of those traits are inherently within, at least certainly, the senior lawyer that's been practicing, certainly for as long as I have. But it wasn't the ones it hasn't been the ones that have been necessarily the ones that have been rewarded. And so I think the whole point of having labels and the point of bias existing around us is to create shortcuts, to make it easy to pit ourselves and to put ourselves in a right lane. And now I'm saying, I know we love simplicity. I know we love a quick box and a label, but we're going to have to widen that mirror. Now, reflecting, if I had to share my own personal experience, I feel like I have been navigating labels throughout my career. Not only is the profession predicated on them, but I suppose for me, born and raised in the UK, I'm a child of immigrants. You get very used to what we call code switching, looking and going, oh, this is how things might be in my household, but when I go out into the world, I behave like the other people around me. We get good at actually putting people into boxes and thinking of them in relation to ourselves. Now, what is interesting when you reflect on my career journey is that having worked across countries, cultures, industries, those labels actually create an identity and a depiction of what is the ideal lawyer. And AI becomes very important with this. If we know that if we put in to generative AI, if we ask it to generate an image of a lawyer, it's still likely to reflect back at me a picture of an older, white, slightly heavy-set man in a suit.
Probably not an Olga or a Dharshi. How about that? It's
not
a little easier to say what not as opposed to what is.
Exactly. Now, I may be a great lawyer. I'm sure you are a great lawyer, Olga, but we don't look like a great lawyer ought to, according to these perceptions and according to what is now being mirrored back to us at scale by AI. And so these biases, now bias comes up in the AI discussion so much, and it has done from the beginning of automation and machine learning, because we know that it's the data in that produces the output at the other end. And we know that we should be live to those things. But what I believe now is that we are at this inflection point when we already know that the labels to date aren't quite cutting it for what the profession is asking of us. And we know that for everyone, bias is likely to be amplified by AI. So we get to be both solvers of our own problem within a profession, but also the arbiters of shaping what good AI use looks like for everyone else. Because this is where the newer labels of judgment, ethical decision-making, reasoning, decision-making under uncertainty, that's going, for me, it's going way back to our foundational training as lawyers. And we get to start to hone those skills alongside. So we can now advise clients and businesses on just how to question that output, that yes, it's produced at speed, yes, looks very impressive and very confident, and we love a confident sounding lawyer, but it's not always right. And lawyers are, I think, best placed to be able to both pick it up and course correct, also at speed.
Yeah, there's a very robust discourse, increasing robust discourse around human judgment, legal judgment generally, and how hard it is to actually replicate. It's much easier to replicate confidence than competence, hence the empirical results of Dunning-Kruger effect that we've known about for a long time, which, as you mentioned, AI systems reflect very well. Read half a book, confidence through the roof at all-time high. Approach PhD level, and you're somewhere in the middle on that confidence. That's how I usually separate folks who just read half a book from someone who actually spent a lifetime.
Yeah.
That's a really high correlation right there. It's empirically derived correlation, almost right across discipline. But I'm just curious, what does it actually mean, that human judgment, that legal judgment, that thing that is really hard to bottle, it's very hard to replicate. I've now built a number of systems, and replicating that subject matter expertise, not just what the law says, because the answers are easy. What's hard is judgment. That replicating that is actually systematically, consistently, and repeatedly and accurately is increasingly hard. I've now tried to do it in various disciplines, and it took me a couple of tries to do it well, have somewhat of a model to do it, and it was AI at this point. Curious, what does it actually mean in practice inside a real, say, business decision, a transaction, I do this or that, legal advice? What does that human judgment, legal judgment mean in practice?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I don't envy you building right now for that. I'm certainly very curious to see more of the tools that are coming out, having taken this into account. But I'll give you my in-house lawyer view on how I am trying to put a framework and words and practice around judgment. So put simply, I see judgment in our context as being able to decide what matters, being able to decide what does not matter, what happens next, and who owns the consequences. And we've mentioned it before, but it's really as well being able to make those decisions under conditions of uncertainty, ambiguity, and competing presence. So, as you pointed out, getting the answer right is in some ways the easy bit. And actually, we also have focused a lot on having the answer in the first place and having access to all that information, which is now being democratized through AI. But law was never really about information alone, right? It's always about the consequence, the accountability, trade-offs, the relationships, understanding the human emotions and the humans and their imperatives in a particular transaction. Now, AI can assist with a lot of those things, but it cannot own them, right? That ownership is also judgment. Then the next layer to thinking about judgment in practical terms is remembering that it comes into play at every stage of our work, of an engagement, of a workflow, actually starting in-house in an organizational level, exercising judgment in establishing the architecture around how we're going to deploy AI. But there's judgment in framing a question, right? We know the technology can be exactly the same, but the prompt and the nature of that prompt in order to get an output is going to be heavily dependent on judgment and knowing what are the interests of the business. And I think when we're working on building our own and internally, you have the ability to assume the right personas or create the right personas and backdrop and all of the factors that are affecting the particular business you're operating in. Then you get the answer, you get the confident looking answer. And then we have to exercise that judgment in assessing the output itself, because as we know, it can give us something very confident and looks very pretty and plausible. But remembering that AI is just mirroring back, we will also see and receive different insights from it depending on who is reviewing it. One might see this insight, one might blindly accept it, where another is able to spot the missing context if there is one, or see a particular risk. Again, technology is the same. It's the quality of the judgment that's applied to it that matters. And then the accountability, that's the bit that I go, I don't envy you in that bit, Olga, deciding on the action. Now, that's where accountability lives. And I think, so again, AI can generate your options, your strategies. I certainly use AI as a thinking tool to stress test myself as well as the tool and go down all the avenues that I know it is possible for it to bring out a response. But here is where I think we have to remember that it's the people that are going to decide which consequences we're willing to live with. It's very easy for the tool to give us plausible and practical and compliant responses. But without that judgment layer on understanding the context, what we can live with, what are the other nuances around it, that the quality of that response is half-baked.
Yeah, and it improves with the quality of an operator who asks better questions. Hence, the reason why the art of, for example, writing prompts is something that folks talk about. You and I approaching the same system, asking different questions, feeding it the different data layer will end up with a very different answers. And the art of asking questions is informed by that judgment. And for the record, I'm actually really excited to be building at this time, and I'm really grateful for the fact that I've come to it after I practiced law for almost 20 years and had an opportunity to run numerous other legal tech companies and advise them for the last 15 years or so. I feel very blessed, actually. If I graduated from law school 20 years earlier, I would not be able to live to my highest potential. And I'm really, actually, I think it's a constellation event that brought me to be where I am today. So I'm extraordinarily grateful to do what looks like impossible, that I over time reduced to improbable, to now doable, and actually systematically figuring out a way to do it. So absolutely grateful for a highly unlikely journey to be doing it in the United States, in Silicon Valley, and being equipped through life experiences to approach this hard problem in my lifetime. But let's focus a little bit on legal profession and what it historically has rewarded, and whether historically rewarded being technically right much more than what I would describe as strategically wise. And does AI make that tension harder to ignore? Meaning, could it be that AI merely took a massive light and said, there, you've always missed training folks to have legal judgment. You always outsourced it to osmosis and allowed 10 to 20 years to get there. And that always has been the whole. It just was not as visible because the speed was slower, because their alternatives were fewer, because it wasn't as democratic and available. But now that the speed is there, now that it is obvious, now that the answers are so readily available, that missing judgment is actually much more visible faster, because that's all there is left.
I love your optimism, and I share it. And so it's lovely to meet others, because I think it's probably reflective of the fact that I have been maybe amongst a few more people lately who have been coming to me with a bit more of that fearful side. And so I'm really grateful for being able to amplify the opportunities that exist here. And I also, similarly, I think it's just come at that perfect time of certainly my career, about 20 years in, not too late, not too early. And so I have to say I agree on that notion that now it's just exposing and revealing, as I said, similar to what I was indicating earlier, the spotlight now has to go on to all of these traits that are necessarily part of the growth of a lawyer, but it wasn't what we rewarded. And I partly blame the billable hour and this idea of having to separate things into billable and non-billable. And sometimes that thinking time, I remember in a law firm, that always would be an issue for debate. Can we charge for this? Can we not charge for this? But in a 6-minute output, or a 6-minute unit, you're not paying for those 6 minutes. You're paying for the years of developed wisdom to get to the right answer for that particular client. Now, I think in our context, I denote wisdom with similar to judgment and all the things that we were talking about. And if we get it links neatly into the idea of, are we focusing on the right labels and exercising judgment, and remembering that what AI is going to both mirror and amplify and industrialize back at us. And so I suppose if I'm going to carry on that, take that conversation or question to the next level, Olga, it's starting to ask us to actually get a bit more serious about documenting and creating the framework and steps for what that good judgment looks like. And right now I'm thinking about that in a couple of ways. One, I mentioned we've got all our lawyers who are desperately trying to show themselves with technical fluency and prowess. We have lawyers that are still upskilling at a slower pace, and the ones that maybe were 20 years ahead of us and are caught between, should I be investing in this? I'm not actually going to see this all come through. And what I would say to them and to those that think that this tech stuff is not for them is, let's start thinking about documenting your own processes for thinking. How would you explain this to a junior lawyer? So this comes to both to save our careers as older or less technically qualified lawyers, but also I think it could be that first stage of really engaging with the fact that lawyers coming up who will be AI native will now have to be taught this judgment, because they're not necessarily going to have the late nights, the big teams, the plowing through hundreds of contracts to look at just one particular clause and its implications till the cows came home. So for those people sitting down, and if you think about it, even in the arc that I shared over judgment, at every stage, what is the thinking? What are the elements of context that are coming through there? Then those are the things that actually will become a workflow, or they'll become that process map that can be used for AI. And that also is, I think, the playbook for training juniors, for making sure that alongside the tech, we have this moving in tandem. I think we just need an ecosystem where the and is much more caps lock than the or when it comes to AI and human judgment. And I'm actually curious, Olga, as to actually whether any of that fits in with your approach to how you have built in judgment to tools, because that's something that I'm thinking about, going, actually just share all those things. We need to codify it. All the things that you were just you think just happen naturally and on autopilot, they don't. And when we think about bias, it's a really common bias that lawyers have, this cognitive bias called the curse of knowledge, where we think that because we know something, it must be really obvious. And it can't be worth spreading. And I feel that a bit sometimes talking about human judgment. Of course, lawyers have to know how to think critically, and all my peers will be doing that every day. But it's not obvious to everyone. And documenting something, creating the data sets of tomorrow is something that I think all of us have the ability to do. More, I think we have an obligation to do so to enable the longevity of our profession.
Yeah, reducing something to judgment is actually is a process. And I remember when I started on LinkedIn a long time ago, and at some point, somebody somehow labeled me to be very good at this thing called branding, which and that's how I learned about it. And anyway, someone put me on the spot and asked me, how do you do this? And I said something really profound, something along the lines, so you write a post and then you click send. Because that's exactly how I approach it. I just share what's in front of me and click send. And the response from the audience, somebody raised her hand and said, yeah, it's like asking a bird how to fly, and the bird tells you, flip your wings. The bird flies and I'm yet still here resisting gravity. There is just a difference. And if you ever teach, there is a difference between teaching a law, for example, tell me what GDPR says, versus a difference how to make decision in uncertainty that involves judgment, whether to put a product on the marketplace, for example, a responsible product on the marketplace. That's a very different thing. That actually only tangentially has something to do with what GDPR says. And reducing it to what you described as data and correct taxonomies is not as easy, even for relatively small decisions. It's actually a lot of hard intellectual work, and it's not entirely obvious. And it is kind of the same reason why the person who is an amazing practitioner may or may not be the best teacher of that art, which is, we all know that because we've learned law through apprenticeship, and we know exactly who is good at teaching, and we know exactly who we need to watch and learn by osmosis, it's not that they're hiding the ball, is that they're not always good at articulating how to make the ball go up. And that's illustrated by asking me, how do you build a personal brand? And I just click send. It's literally the steps, and it's absolutely not helpful. And so that's actually a lot of hard work and not an easy task. And just like not everyone is born to teach, not everyone is born to reduce to helpful data sets and taxonomies to lead to outcomes of, for example, releasing products that are responsible in the marketplace. So it's actually, there is this sort of big technical gap in building AI, and a lot of that is narrow and useful is in that ability to create something of use. But let me draw this dichotomy between somebody who's experienced that may or may not be excited to wipe code, for example. And honestly, my opinion is that I don't think lawyers should be wipe coding. And I don't believe it's really going to be for everyone. I think there will be a select group of people who will, but I think it's going to be by far minority, independent of age, independent of experiences. And we have seen this movie before with Solidity during crypto. I, as somebody who can code in Solidity, I can tell you I'm one of the few who can, and I absolutely did not love it. And it was really difficult to make mass adoption of that among lawyers. And I don't believe wipe code or even prompting is something that would get a lot of excitement about as a core competency and skill, regardless of the age.
Yeah.
That aside, I want to focus the question on folks in their early career. And that early career could be in the beginning of your life, so in your 20s, 30s, in your 40s, or some people begin law career in their 50s and 60s. So being an equal opportunity here for lawyers earlier in their career, independent of age, what skills or habits becoming important if they're not going to learn it through, say, earned hard work for the 10 years of osmosis?
Yeah.
How are they getting there?
Yeah, so where I'm at the moment on that is really focusing on the critical thinking elements and actually bringing those judgment skills back up to the fore. So my view on, and I totally resonate with this idea, it is very difficult to explain, and it just is when you've been doing it for so long. And so I see a real call to action for much closer collaboration between seniors in our profession and the juniors. And I know there's lots of, again, external factors that make this harder in some ways with hybrid and international working than others, but it's almost working backwards from the new values and the new labels that we were talking about earlier, and saying now we're back onto the spotlight piece, because we know that the AI is going to produce stuff. So your job is actually not to spend as much time reading up on the law and trying to interpret the subclauses directly, because actually the AI is going to can give you a multiple options, and which will be close to landing. But the bit that's going to make your response or your output the correct one is going to be your thinking process through which of the outputs is correct. And so in that regard, we are focusing on the questioning piece. So you mentioned that, the art of asking the question. I really think, even I've got 2 young daughters, and thinking about how education and things will change in order to bring that next generation of lawyers into the fold. These are going to be people that won't know where AI ends and their mind begins. And so the ability to ask really good questions, and where our risk brains can really get trained, is to really question everything. Because once you ask a question, there's always a follow-up, there's always a follow-up. I feel like it's a brain training exercise with junior lawyers, and not the knowledge exercise, which is a lot for us who've crammed information in order to learn and then just learn by osmosis. We're actually flipping this around, park some of the brain space on the knowledge stuff and really focus on the critical thinking. And why I was thinking about that collaboration piece is I wonder, Olga, whether that will make the codifying judgment, the starting to actually turn everyone into good teachers. a bit easier. But is there a space where in the law firm, the juniors are going to be running some of those teaching sessions? So to help the seniors go, oh yeah, those are the layers that I put into the thinking process. So yeah, my starter for 10 is really critical thinking and asking the questions, because then on the side, you're learning about your business or the client's business. That's all the same. When a brief comes in, what do? You Google the company, you Google what they're doing. So there is that the information gathering works, but you're doing information gathering in order to support thinking, not the other way around, which is how I think we've been doing it today.
Yeah, I think that junior, senior, not an age, but experience reflective, I think it's important. The second, I think even probably even more critical, is that collaboration between tech and subject matter expertise. Yeah. I talk to a lot of folks who build, and I build legal tech teams, and I can't, basically the first question I ask is who's a subject matter expert on your team, because I just don't think that anything of value can be built without one. And on teams that I build, I'm almost never a subject matter expert, even though I am a generically good lawyer, all things considered. I give example. I collaborate with somebody Gabrielle, who is a partner building something in family law mediation, and we use a lot of synthetic data to get into various data layers and taxonomies. And I created a bunch of stuff that looked very reasonable to me as somebody who've never been through divorce, either as a child or a parent. And it looked like a really reasonable script. I put it in front of her and I said, look, this is amazing. I think this is right. And she said, yeah, it sounds amazing, but for the fact that I've never seen this in the last 30 years that I've been practicing. And I'm a generic lawyer with a generically good judgment. I'm just not a subject matter expert in our law. And this happens so many times where I would say, this sounds reasonable, that sounds about right. I took obvious junk out of it, but this sound makes sense. I can imagine this conversation. And she says, Olga, you have a fantastically good imagination, but I can tell you conversations like this never happened in the last 30 years of my practicing this mediation across the United States in every jurisdiction. And that's the difference between somebody who is generically good lawyer, generically has a good judgment, generically has a good intelligence, generically smart, versus somebody who actually been doing it for 30 years. And I think that's why it's an important piece of the subject matter expertise and how you're bottling it up.
And sorry, I was just thinking that when you said that, actually another piece of excellent sign of having excellent judgment is you know what you don't know. And that is really important. And also it made me think of a label or a trait that we haven't really spoken about, and that is curiosity. Because Olga is an in-house counsel, and within the profession itself, we need to think about it, I think, the opposite way of saying that we need more technologists within our ecosystem and sitting alongside us to build what we need alongside us, rather than us trying to dabble too much in tech that we then can't scale ourselves. And we are known to be a little bit arrogant at times and think that we have all the answers as lawyers and we can figure this out because that's what we do.
Wait, Dharshi, you mean we don't have all the answers? Seriously, we don't? And the only reason why I enter this profession is because we have all the answers. I tell people what to do for a living.
Exactly. So there we're at. But that's where it works both ways, because I think I see a lot of resistance to the idea, to even sharing the idea with some law firm partners that a law firm is actually going to be a tech company. Everywhere's going to be a tech company, because actually you're going to have, or there's going to be a future where a law firm will have more non-lawyers than lawyers in it. I think law firms have typically been just so fee earner focused, when we need so much more in order to be able to enable that. So I think that curiosity and respect for other people's judgment and how it's being brought up the chain is going to be really important to succeed going forward.
We've had a long conversation and lost track of time. So it is time for us to almost say goodbye. I'll ask you one more question. Usually I don't get lost, but this is a conversation I deeply care about. I think this bottling up judgment and how to make sure that it is in all these things we build, I think it's very critical, how we surface information that facilitates human good judgment as opposed to the opposite. But I'll ask you maybe one more question. Like, if you had to redefine what makes an exceptional lawyer today, or 3 years from now, or maybe 5 years from now, take whatever time frame, today, 3, 5, 10 years from now, one sentence, I don't know, 1 to 3 sentences. You may struggle just like me to say things in one sentence sometimes, especially when you overflow with, oh my God, all the thoughts you have. What would you say?
Yes, you've got me in one there, and I'm piecing together everything we've talked about in one sentence. And it's something along the lines.
Throw away that one sentence constraint. That was cruel, unusual, and mean. And I take it back. I apologize. I would have not liked it on me, and I'm not going to impose it on you.
No, that's okay. I think because there's been some really key themes that we've explored in getting here, and I think that exceptional lawyer is someone that can navigate risk and technology and complexity without losing sight of the humans that are affected by their decisions. And why that's so important, and so important for lawyers to remember that they have so much value. And if you're creative and curious, which are things, particularly the creativity, we don't use that term often with lawyers, but I think if we're creative and curious and constantly able to hold multiple truths and complexity together and line it up with human decision making, we will go so far, because actually AI is driving us into a world where we just need everything to be boxed in simple one-word answers. And I think one of the traits and one of the biggest rewards of my legal training has been that ability to constantly hold vast amounts of complex information, but with that humanity and with my lived experience. And that those final pieces are the bit that the technology won't have to back it up.
Yeah. Imagine the world 5 years from now. What do you think younger lawyers who will look back on and realize the profession misunderstood about this AI transition?
I think this is a moment, and I said it's a moment to redefine value, but do you know what just came up to into my head, Olga? It was Emily in Paris. I don't know if you watched the show. It's Emily, but Emily is a marketing girl in Paris, and something that always gets me is where she's just always on, because she's always working, because everything and every part of her life somehow can be used in her work. And because the future lawyer is going to have to be so clued in to that human connection and understanding the real world consequences of all the knowledge that we'd otherwise spend years doing, I just think lawyers, maybe, is there an opportunity to make law just a little bit more glamorous, a little bit more like we don't have to apologize for being a corporate lawyer, because actually I think juniors will make it, the newer generation are constantly looking to turn something into something creative and something meaningful, and they're looking for purpose in what they're doing. And I think the new generation will flip GDPR for GDPR's sake onto its head and be going into that real world human impact of what happens when we're losing our data, and actually coming from a different angle to create law and policy and commercial legal answers for our clients. That's maybe two optimists together have just blown out.
No, what stood out to me
too far, but I'm just going to leave you with that, because
what stood out to me was
imagine.
You mentioned creativity and curiosity, which the answer I heard before, but the answer that actually stood out to me was the two answers before, when you said holding two truths simultaneously. And I think there's something inherently human and judgment related, and it's related to this process of ambiguity and being able to hold a couple of truths at the same time, as opposed to black and white, as opposed to this highly articulate, confident answer of what's black and white right now. Because the reality is we live in simultaneous possibilities all the time. That's the principles of quantum. As soon as you actually have an outcome, you reduce it to outcome. But you can't possibly live in multiple realities if you are able to hold it and test those realities as you go. And I think that's inherently what I think sums up your views on judgment.
I think so.
I love it. We can talk for a long time, because clearly neither you nor I love to talk. And this has been an amazing conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. What is a takeaway you would like to give to the audience for folks who joined us? We've had a very active chat. There's a lot of views around curiosity, collaboration, the future of law. I'm going to thank everyone who participated in this conversation and contributed. You have many fans, Dharshi. But I'm curious, what is one takeaway you want to give to folks who joined us and who will be listening to this session?
Well, look, thank you, Olga, for having me and inviting me to this conversation. I've long respected all your work from afar, so it was such a delight to be invited here and have this conversation. Everything I share is a conversation starter here. And I would say my biggest takeaway is to be, without repeating curiosity, it's to really start to think a little bit more deeply about all your experiences, not maybe just even the direct professional ones that you've had as a lawyer that you think could help you in your role now that you're looking to work alongside AI. This is new territory for everyone. So everyone is learning. It means everyone has a valid opinion and thought. And it means that in order to come up with new ideas, we have to look outside of the box that we've been in. So I think if you've had varied lived experiences, if you've grown up had a different cultural background, if you are involved in things outside of your work, start to use all aspects of your life to help you start documenting what judgment could look like in your workplace alongside AI.
Oh, I love it. This is so great. Dharshi, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'm so excited that we've been able to make this Pacific coast of the United States, Singapore conversation real time and so many folks joining us.
Beautiful. Thank you again, Olga. It's my absolute pleasure.
Thank you, audience. I love the message of optimism. I love the message of curiosity, creativity, and holding multiple truths. I think that's very human. I like us all to reflect on what it means to have human judgment, how to show up as a real partner to your AI partners and your human partners, and how to bring value to the table. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.